My name is Stanley Edward Sikowski Jr. I was born on 6/17/1951. I'm going to be discussing Air Force and Air Force cover-up that has denied me PTSD for over 50 years. And I just hope that people will get this story out because I've tried through state senators, I've tried through Congress people, I've tried through news networks, podcasts, networks like CNN, etc., and lawyers, and AMVETS and DAV, and got nowhere with them regarding this. However, I do want to make a mention that DAV did get me 100% back in 2016 for unemployability, but I was denied PTSD. I'm going to read my remembrance of the issues and what happened to me, and then I'm going to read the Air Force's response. And then I got a follow-up after the Air Force response is asking questions that people should also be asking as to why these things happened the way they did. I enlisted in the USAF and went to basic training at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas in February of 1971. Upon my completion of basic training, I went to Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas for training to be an accountant. My first assignment was to Kunsan AB South Korea in September of 1971. Upon my arrival, I was to be assigned to base supply accounting, but was temporarily assigned to payroll under the supervision of Staff Sergeant Ward and commanded by Captain Ingram, as the base supply building wasn't completed. Upon the building being completed, I was under the direct supervision of Tech Sergeant Milton. There was another Tech Sergeant, but I cannot remember his name. And now I'm going to give you the impressions of each Tech Sergeant as follows. Tech Sergeant Milton was always glass-eyed and drunk, as well as the other Tech Sergeant. This caused me to be more cautious when talking with either one. The Tech Sergeant that I can't remember was, for the most part, very quiet and talked very little. In the second part of October 1971, I was sent TDY to Yokota Air Base, Japan, to learn about a new base supply accounting system that the Air Force was about to implement. I was there for about 4 weeks and then returned to Kunsan Air Base. A few days after I returned, and I can't remember the exact dates, I requested to talk to both Tech Sergeants to discuss what was occurring. When I started discussing what I learned, Tech Sergeant Milton stood up and yelled that no lowly airman was going to tell him what to do. And I wasn't trying to tell him what to do, I was just trying to tell him what was coming down the road. And then he stormed out of the building. The other Tech Sergeant just sat there and didn't say anything. I also left the building and returned to my barracks until supper time. After supper, I met up with Sergeant Smith, who was the chaplain's assistant and a close friend that I had while I was stationed there. We went to the Airmen's Club, where I discussed what happened with Tech Sergeant Milton. As a note, Tech Sergeant Milton was the guard at arms for entering the Airmen's Club that night. After discussing the ordeal, I informed Sergeant Smith that I was going to apologize to Tech Sergeant Milton, as I wasn't sure of what else to do. I approached him and started to apologize, stating that we got off on the wrong foot and that I would like to be able to continue discussion of what I had learned. He looked up at me with glassy eyes and stated to get out of his face or he would kill me. Other airmen heard his comments, and then I returned to our table, white as a ghost. Sergeant Smith asked me what had happened, and I told him. He suggested that we leave the club and call it a night. I went straight to my bunk and fell asleep. However, about 2 hours later, I was awakened to see Captain Ingram, Tech Sergeant Vandersloot, Sergeant Smith, the chaplain, and base commander Colonel Gunnarsson standing there, as well as military police. I was given a direct order from Colonel Gunnarsson to dress and pack all my belongings. I asked what was going on, but I was told to just follow orders, which I did. I was then escorted to a waiting jeep by military police and taken directly to the terminal and was told that I was going home on emergency leave with no further explanation. Upon my arrival back home in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, I was contacted by medical staff from Westover Air Force Base to be seen by a psychiatrist. My first visit was to go over why I was there and what was going to occur. I had other visits where I was coached as to what to say at the hearing board by the psychiatrist, as he sat on this board as well. I asked the psychiatrist why I couldn't be transferred to another base or TDY until Tech Sergeant Milton left Kunsan Air Base. He informed me that I had two choices and that I would either be returned to Kunsan Air Base or take a discharge from the Air Force. Being only 21 at the time, I was scared and opted for the discharge. On the day of my discharge, I went to the administration building to process out of the Air Force at Westover Air Force Base. I met with a second lieutenant and a sergeant, and he had a medical discharge with disability pay prepared. However, he looked over my file and decided to rip it up and prepared an honorable discharge with disability pay. In June of '72, I received a letter from Sergeant Smith who explained the real reason for me being discharged. From Kunsan Air Base was about 80% African American. Tech Sergeant Milton was also an African American and was the leader of the Black Panthers at Kunsan Air Base. He was transferred to Kunsan Air Base from the Philippines or another Asian base after he stabbed another airman at that base he was assigned to. He was demoted to a tech sergeant from being a senior master sergeant. I do not have the actual letter anymore, but research of Tech Sergeant Milton should back my story. Over the next 44 years, I have experienced nightmares and dreams of what occurred to me while I served at Kunsan Air Base, Korea. I still have recurring dreams and nightmares of what happened to me. I also attempted suicide once in 1984. Once I learned about PTSD, I constantly asked why this diagnosis didn't apply to me. Even when my disability rating went to 100% in 2016, it was only based on unemployability and not PTSD. On one occasion, when I visited the psychiatrist at current times here, I brought along my wife. I did this as there were times when I would hit her while I was having dreams and nightmares while I was sleeping about fighting this individual. I currently have severe symptoms of long COVID, which are different from the standard symptoms due to medications that I currently on while taking the medication provided to me at the emergency room in Tampa, Florida for COVID. I was on 3 medications for depression and anxiety when I was subscribed methylprednisolone and modafinil and trazodone and duloxetine. Since I am 74 years old, I suspect that the trazodone med coupled with the other meds caused my long-term symptoms to be more severe than the side effects without taking this medication. Because I wasn't diagnosed, it was 10 days after I already had COVID, because I was misdiagnosed by the VA as having bronchitis, that I couldn't be put on Paxlovid. So my symptoms are just disheartening. I am currently going to be setting up for a cardiac catheterization as I experience shortness of breath, etc., etc. Given this, I have attempted to join PTSD groups at the VA off-site campus in Tampa, Florida, only to be told that I do not qualify to join, even though I explained that I was in a combat area drawing combat pay and what had happened to me. So this is my story to now, and now I'm going to read to you the letter that the Air Force just recently sent me a couple of weeks ago. It starts off with applicant's request. His official military personnel records be amended to reflect his discharge was due to post-traumatic stress disorder. That was what I was requesting. He wants his records to reflect the true reason for his discharge from the Air Force and have his records reflect PTSD. He has tried and requested through various departments of Veterans Affairs, doctors, and veteran organizations, but have been unable to have PTSD added to his disability. Okay, now we're down to the statement of facts. The applicant is an honorably discharged airman, Air Force Airman, First Class, E3. On January 7th, 1972, according to Air Force Form 618, the applicant was diagnosed with anxiety neurosis severe, incurred while entitled to basic pay. Yes, existed prior to service. No. The applicant was referred to the Physical Evaluation Board. On January 24th, 1972, according to Air Force Form 356, the applicant was found unfit because of physical disability and diagnosis with anxiety, neurosis interfering with performance of duty with moderate social and industrial impairment is disabling. It incurred while entitled to receive base pay. Degree of impairment is permanent. At that point, I got mine 100% for 1 year. The PEB recommended discharge with severance pay and a compensatable percentage of 100%. On January 27th again, according to Air Force Form, the finalization of the board, the applicant was briefed on his right to demand a formal hearing and concurred with the recommended findings. On the 28th of January 1972, according to a Secretary of the Air Force Personnel Council memorandum, subject was for separation from active service with disability severance pay of applicant. The Secretary of the Air Force approved the recommendation of the Physical Review Committee that the applicant be separated from active service for physical disability under the provisions of Title 10, United States Code 1203, 10 USC 1203, with severance pay computed under Section 1212 of this title. On the 14th day of February 1972, the applicant was furnished with an honorable discharge with reason and authority of discharge with severance pay and credited with 11 months and 23 days of active service. For more information, it just says go on here. Now here's the Air Force evaluation. They're stating they recommend denying the application. Based on the documentation provided by the applicant and analysis of the facts, there is no indication an error or injustice occurred at this time the PEB processed the applicant's disability case. There is no evidence he was diagnosed with PTSD while in service. Under 10 U.S.C. Chapter 61, the PEB must determine if a member's condition renders them unfit for continued military service relating to their office grade, rank, or rating, and fairly compensate those members whose military careers are cut short due to a service incurred or service aggravated disability. On January 7, 1972, the Medical Evaluation Board found that the applicant potentially unfit for anxiety neurosis severe. The accompanying medical narrative summary indicates he had difficulties adjusting to his first duty station, a remote tour to Kunsan AB South Korea. The mental health provider indicated the applicant's anxiety was severe and there was no evidence of depression, hallucinations, paranoid thinking, or paranoid delusions. His thought content centered on his hate of Korea because of its dirtiness, his anger at having to be there, his anger at the people who live there, and finally on his fear he might not be able to control such hostile feelings. Due to this assessment, the applicant was diagnosed with anxiety neurosis severe. The mental health provider felt that there was significant potential for psychotic decompensation, particularly for paranoid psychosis or even paranoid schizophrenia. The applicant was also assessed with marked functional impairment in terms of usefulness to the military and moderately impaired for adjustment to civilian life. On the 24th of January 1972, the PEB found the applicant unfit for anxiety neurosis interfering with performance of duty with moderate social and industrial impairment and recommended with the 10% rating. The applicant was processed under the older legacy disability evaluation system in which the PEB and DVA made independent assessments of a service member's unfitting conditions and could therefore assign a different diagnosis and rating for the same condition based on examinations and available documentation. The DVA's assessment was conducted following separation, and a PEB was not bound by the DVA's independent rating decision. A review of the applicant's DVA records indicates on the 10th of March of 1972, the DVA initially diagnosed his mental health conditions as severe anxiety reaction and assigned a temporary 100% pre-stabilization rating. This pre-stabilization rate was further reduced to 50% on March 2nd of 1973. On the 1973 decision. The DVA records indicate his unfitting mental health condition had been re-diagnosed, and the rating was changed several times over the course of the years, and is currently rated as generalized anxiety disorder with major depressive disorder, rated at 100%. The most recent rating decision was dated August 26th and 2024. Indicates it has denied his claim for PTSD on two separate occasions. The original denial was on March 3rd of 2016, indicated the applicant's claim for service connection for PTSD was due to the condition not being clinically diagnosed. The second denial in August of 24 indicates the applicant had been newly diagnosed with the onset of PTSD during a June 3rd, 24 examination. Following there was a VA had me have a evaluation by a doctor that the PTA could be contributed to military service, and because I had no other evidence to prove this. However, this particular doctor that the VA had me see specifically states that the Air Force and the VA got it wrong from day one, that my record should be updated to reflect PTSD and what actually happened to me while I was stationed at Kunsan Air Base. The applicant exhausted all available non-judicial relief before applying to the board. After reviewing all exhibits, the board concludes the applicant is not the victim of an error or injury. The board concurs with the rationale and recommendations of the other two groups and finds a preponderance of the evidence does not substitute the applicant's contentions. The PEB appropriately assessed the applicant's unfitting mental health condition and degree of impairment at the time of his discharge. There is no evidence the applicant suffered from or was diagnosed with PTSD during service. Further, the Air Force and the DVA, a disability systems operates under separate laws, and they must determine if a service member's condition renders them unfit for continued military service. To be unfitting, the condition must be such that it alone precludes the member from fulfilling their military duties. The PEB then applies the rating best associated with the level of disability at the time of the disability processing, and that rating determines the final disposition. The DVA may evaluate a service member over the years, and their rating may be increased or decreased based on changes in a medical condition, based on an applicant's medical condition at the current time. However, a higher rating by the DVA based on exams conducted after a discharge from the service does not warrant a change to the total compensatable rating awarded at the time of the member's separation. Therefore, the board recommends against correcting the applicant's records. The applicant has not shown a personal appearance with or without counsel would materially add to the board's understanding of the issues involved. Now, I'm still going on. The recommendations. The board recommends informing the applicant the evidence does not demonstrate material error or injustice, and the board will reconsider the application only upon receipt of relevant evidence not already presented. And it was done apparently by signed by three people here that probably never served in their entire life. Now here's my answers to questions that I have regarding what the Air Force said. If anyone is to believe the responses made by the USAF for the reasons why I was discharged in February of 1972, then you need to ask yourself, or the Air Force, the following questions. The USAF response of January 7, 1972 states that their diagnosis actually occurred prior to me entering the service. If this was true, I would never have been allowed to enter basic training for the Air Force. I have never been seen by any I have never seen any doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, otherwise, during my childhood prior to joining the Air Force. Number 2, the Air Force response of January 24, 1972 states that I was diagnosed with being unfit for duty. If this was true, how did I get my promotion in October of 1971, and how did I get an honorable discharge in February of 1972? I was actually going to get a medical discharge with disability, but the sergeant flipped through my military jacket, shook his head, and ripped up the medical discharge and had an honorable discharge prepared with disability. Number 3, the USAF response of January 27, 1972 states that I denied a formal hearing, which is an outright lie. I have never been shown such a document, which I believe would have been prepared and have to bear my signature. Given the number of documents referenced here that I never saw, nor received or reviewed, I had requested several times to obtain copies of my records, only to be told that they were destroyed by the fire in 1973. My research shows that they shouldn't have been destroyed. And because of the Air Force having these records, it proves that they were never destroyed, but I was never offered to get them. Number 4, the USAF response here is totally fabricated by the Air Force. I was proud to serve, and my draft number was 073, and I would not have been drafted. I believe the true reason why I got an honorable discharge versus a medical is that there was a letter of commendation in my military jacket from the Colonel of Base Supply at Yokota Air Base, Japan, for my professionalism in learning about the new base supply accounting system. That was going to replace all the old systems that the Air Force currently had been using. Number 5. I have attempted several times for PTSD, and not just the 2 times mentioned by the Air Force. The letter that I reference in my claim that I no longer have states the true facts of what actually happened to me in 1971. I know that I showed this letter to Dr. Robert Bates. He was a psychologist at the Northampton VA hospital when I had possession of the letter, as well as mentioning everything that happened to me to all the doctors that the VA has assigned to me, only not to be taken seriously. And this also applies to AMVETS specifically. It should be in my record at the Northampton VA hospital, as I had called, there is no mention of my suicide attempt in 1983. However, it should be in my record at the Northampton VA hospital, as I called them after I overdosed with my meds. My ex-wife was preventing me from seeing my daughters, and I was haunted by the occurrence of what happened to me in 1971 via nightmares and dreams. If it wasn't for my current wife, I may have attempted suicide down the road until I succeeded. I even mentioned to my psychiatrist, Dr. Daniels, that when I have these dreams that I had actually hit my wife during these dreams. My wife was with me when I informed Dr. Daniels of these occurrences, but I cannot find any mention of this in his records nor in the last request for PTSD. Number 6, I have never been afforded a request to appear before this board since my discharge in 1972, because I currently am waiting to hear as to when I can go to Washington, D.C. to speak before this board, which I hope can happen before I pass, because I'm getting very frustrated. I feel broken, and I just can't believe they won't take me seriously. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I forgot. At the most part, please share this YouTube video with all your friends and neighbors and on all social platforms, so maybe somebody will take me serious and help me through this crisis, because it just bewilders me that I could not join a PTSD group nor being taken seriously by any of the doctors that I've been assigned to here at the VA or back up in Massachusetts as well. I've told this story so many times, it's embedded in my head, and it is the truth. So help me God.